I grew up in a small town where stories traveled faster than the wind. The one story everyone knew but no one dared to test was about the old library at the end of Oak Ridge Street. It was a place with broken windows, heavy wooden doors that groaned like they were alive, and books that smelled like graves. But the strangest rumor wasn't about the books. It was about the roof. They said every night, when the clock struck midnight, you could hear footsteps pacing back and forth above, heavy metallic steps. The problem was, there was no roof. The library was flat-topped, no attic, no staircase, no access at all. Yet, the sound was undeniable. I never believed it. At least, not until the summer I was 17. That's when I decided to sneak inside with nothing but a flashlight and my own arrogance. The doors gave way with a slow creak, and the smell hit me first. Dust, mold, and something coppery, like dried blood. Inside, the bookshelves stretched high, shadows swallowing the ceiling. My light caught glimpses of cobwebs, peeling wallpaper, and old tables covered with carvings I couldn't recognize. For a few minutes, it was just me and the silence, but then, a single book slid itself out of a shelf and fell onto the floor. The sound cracked through the quiet, and my heart jumped to my throat. I bent down, my flashlight shaking, and picked it up. The cover was blank. When I opened it, the pages weren't filled with words but names. Dozens, maybe hundreds of names, each with a date beside it. Some dates were over a century old. Some were more recent. Too recent. I flipped further and froze when I saw my grandmother's name. The date next to it was the exact day she died. My hands went cold. I turned more pages, and every name I recognized was someone from town. People who had passed away. I wanted to put the book back, to run, but then I noticed the last page. My own name was scrawled across it, the ink still wet. That's when the footsteps began above me, heavy, metallic, echoing as if someone was dragging chains across the non-existent roof. And worse, they were moving in circles directly over me. I don't remember dropping the book, but I do remember the sound it made as it hit the floor, echoing too loud in the silence. My flashlight flickered, sputtering like a dying candle. The footsteps overhead grew faster, heavier. I should have left, but something in me felt paralyzed. I tilted my light upward, and for a split second I swore I saw dust falling from the ceiling, as if someone really was stomping above. But there was no second floor, no roof, just blackness. Suddenly the silence split. A voice whispered, not from above but from the shelves themselves. "Read the next page." The words were faint, stretched thin, like they had traveled 1,000 miles before reaching me. My flashlight beam swung wildly, landing on the book I had dropped. The pages had flipped themselves, stopping at one I hadn't seen before. Beneath my name, another line had appeared. A time, midnight, tonight. The clock on the wall ticked like thunder in my ears. I had minutes left. I ran. My sneakers slapped against the dusty wooden floor, echoing like screams. I barreled past shelves, trying to find the door, but the building twisted on itself. The aisles seemed longer, the shelves taller, the exit farther away. And then I saw them. The faces. Between the rows of books, pale figures stood. Their eyes were sunken, their mouths twisted open as if caught in a silent scream. Their bodies weren't solid, they were fading in and out like old photographs burning at the edges. But their eyes followed me. One of them stepped forward. It was my grandmother. Her lips trembled, and in a voice that was both hers and something else entirely, she whispered, "He's already walking your roof." Before I could move, every light in the building went out. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into suffocating black. And then, the ceiling groaned, not just footsteps this time. Something heavier, something that bent the wood, like claws dragging slowly across it. Dust rained down on me, and a single crack began to split open above. And from that crack, a shadow started leaking through. I wanted to scream, but the air was too heavy in my lungs. The shadow stretched across the floor like spilled ink, crawling toward me with jerky, unnatural movements. It didn't have a shape at first, just darkness, hungry and alive. I stumbled back, crashing into a shelf. Books tumbled onto me, their covers flying open. Every one of them landed with the same sickening consistency, open to pages with my name written again and again, sometimes in different handwriting, sometimes smeared like blood. The shadow rose taller than me, taller than the shelves, pressing against the ceiling like smoke trapped in a jar. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though it had no face, I felt its eyes pierce me. Then, in a voice that rattled the shelves, it spoke. "Your story is almost done." The crack above widened, and now I could see it wasn't just a shadow, it was a figure dragging itself down from the impossible roof. Rusted chains dangled from its arms, clanging against the wood. Its footsteps matched the sound that had haunted this place for years. Every thud was a countdown. I turned and ran, but the shelves weren't shelves anymore. They had warped into walls, their books melting like wax. Faces screamed from the pages, their mouths wide, their eyes desperate. Every direction I turned, the figure was there, closer, chains dragging, footsteps echoing. Finally, I reached the front doors. My hands fumbled on the handles, yanking with every ounce of strength. They wouldn't budge. Behind me, the chains scraped across the floor, and the shadow whispered my name, over and over. And then, I woke up, or at least I thought I did. I was lying in my bed, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. My room was dark, but safe. No books, no library, no shadows, just a dream. Until I heard it, the footsteps. Slow, heavy, metallic, pacing above my ceiling. The library may not have had a roof, but my house does, and something is walking on it. The album smelled of dust and dry paper, a scent that carried the weight of my grandmother's entire life. It was a thick, leather-bound book, heavy in my hands. The day she passed, this was the only thing I asked for. I sat in my quiet Texas home, a small modern house that felt too big for one person, and ran my hand over the embossed title on the cover. Just the word, family. I spent the first few hours meticulously going through it. Page after page of smiling faces, faded by time. My grandmother as a child, my grandfather with a mischievous grin, my mother as a little girl with big, bright eyes. Every picture was neatly placed, every memory meticulously preserved, until I got to the center of the book. There, on a single aging page, was a perfect album-shaped blank space. It was so clean it looked as if the photo had just been removed. There was a faint, yellowed outline where it used to be. My heart sank. What kind of person would tear a picture out of a family album? I dismissed it as an oddity and kept flipping. That's when I noticed it. In a group photo of my grandparents on a picnic, a man stood on the far left. His face was a blur, a perfect featureless haze. It was impossible, the kind of smudge you get when a photo is overexposed, but the rest of the image was perfectly clear. I squinted, trying to make out his features. Nothing. His hand, however, was in sharp focus. It was gripping the shoulder of my grandfather, a hand with unnaturally long, skeletal fingers. A shiver ran down my spine. I closed the album, telling myself it was nothing, just a bad photo, a camera quirk. But the next night, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the album again, this time to a picture of my mother and her two older brothers as children. On the far right, barely visible behind a bush, was a shadow. A long, spindly silhouette that was completely black, absorbing all the light around it. It was positioned exactly where the blurred man would have stood in the other photo. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The missing photo, the blurred face, the shadow. They all pointed to the same thing. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't just a person who had been erased from the family album. This was a thing that had been erased, and whatever it was trying to get back. I had to know. I took a photo of the album page with my phone and sent it to my cousin. "Hey, do you know who this is?" I typed, pointing to the blank space. She wrote back immediately, confused. "What blank space? The photo is there." She sent me a screenshot. My blood ran cold. The blank space on my phone was filled. It was a photo of a man standing in a field, his back to the camera, staring at a place that wasn't there. The air went out of my lungs. I looked from my phone to the open album on the table. The blank space was still there, a pale rectangle where a photograph should have been. But on my phone, the image was perfectly clear. A man in a tattered coat, his back to the camera, standing in a field of dry, yellowed grass. He was staring at a point on the horizon, his hands tucked into his pockets. I had never seen that field before. I had never seen him before. I knew, with a certainty that made my hands shake, that he was the blurred face from the other photos, the spindly shadow in the corner. He had used my phone to get out of the album and into my digital world. My phone buzzed again. A new message from my cousin. "That's so weird. The photo just changed." She sent another screenshot. The man in the tattered coat was no longer staring into the distance. He had turned his head slightly, and his eyes, two empty black voids, were now staring directly at the camera, directly at me. I threw my phone across the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. It skidded across the hardwood floor and came to a stop face down. I didn't dare go near it. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. It was a glitch, a virus, anything but what I knew it was. I went to my grandmother's old camera, the one she had used to take all the photos in the album. It was a bulky old thing, a relic from the past. I grabbed it, my hands slick with sweat, and went to the center of the living room, a single thought pounding in my head. "You can't stay in my house. You don't belong here." I raised the camera, the viewfinder a small dark square. I snapped a picture of the album. The flash was blinding, a brilliant white light that made the world disappear for a second. When my vision returned, I looked down at the physical photograph that slid out of the camera. The blank space was no longer empty. It was filled with a picture. But it wasn't the man in the tattered coat. It was a photo of my living room, my furniture, my couch. And on the couch, where I had been sitting just moments ago, was the blurred face from the album. But it wasn't blurred anymore. Its features were starting to form, to sharpen. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The album, the physical album, was now changing. The man in the tattered coat was slowly, impossibly, becoming visible on the blank page, a faint, sepia-toned figure materializing on the old paper. His hands, the same long skeletal hands from the other photo, reached out from the page. Not as a picture, but as a living thing, reaching for me. The silence was broken by a single terrifying sound, the click of the camera lens, followed by the soft hiss of another photo developing. My own face was on the couch now. I had just taken my own picture, but I wasn't there anymore. My body was moving, but it wasn't me. It was a cold, deliberate motion, like a machine being wound up. I was a spectator in my own mind, a silent, screaming passenger trapped behind my own eyes. My hand, the one that had held the camera, now reached down and picked up the photo album. The blurry face on the cover smiled, its features solidifying into the man from the field, a cruel and knowing grin on a face that was still too smooth, too perfect. The entity wasn't just in the album, it was me. It had used the camera to swap places with me, leaving my consciousness to rot in a two-dimensional world while it walked around in the real one. I could feel its thoughts, its cold, methodical purpose. It wasn't about revenge, it wasn't a ghost. It was a physical thing, a parasite that had been contained, and I had set it free. It had been sealed away, trapped in a blank space, in a life that was so terrible the family had tried to erase it from existence. My feet moved slowly across the living room. I watched my own hands, my own skin, as they went to the fireplace and picked up a match. The entity didn't make a sound. It didn't need to. The silence it created was more terrifying than any scream. I could hear my own thoughts, my panicked cries, but they were trapped inside my skull. unheard by the outside world. I watched as my hands lit the match and held it to the corner of the album. The old paper caught fire, the pages curling and blackening. The faces of my family, their laughing eyes, their happy smiles, all began to melt and burn away. I was watching my entire history, my memories, being destroyed. The entity was not just taking my life, it was erasing the evidence that I ever existed. As the flames licked at the pages, a voice finally broke the silence. My own voice, but it was hollow, empty. It was the voice of the thing inside me. She thought she could trap me, my mother. She thought I was just a memory, an ugly secret she could hide in a book. My body laughed, a dry, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. But you can't contain a monster in a photograph. You can't unlive a life. The last page, the blank one, was all that was left. The fire consumed it, and for a terrifying second, I was filled with a sense of pure, agonizing nothingness. Then, as the final piece of the album turned to ash, my vision was filled with an image, a single photograph, a perfect sepia-toned picture of my empty living room. I was no longer in the picture. My family was no longer in the picture. The monster wearing my face was not in the picture. There was only a single perfectly framed blank space. And I knew, with a certainty that was worse than death, that was my new home. I was a ghost in a photograph. My consciousness was sealed inside a blank, empty space, a new white rectangle waiting to be discovered by a stranger. I had opened the album and let a monster out, and in the end, I was the one who was trapped. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, where the houses looked identical, the lawns always smelled of fresh-cut grass, and the streets emptied before nightfall. Our house was nothing extraordinary, except for the living room corner. The corner was empty. No furniture, no decorations, nothing. My mother always said, "Leave that space alone, it's not meant for us." When I was young, I thought she meant it was a design choice, but the older I got, the more I noticed things. Sitting on the couch, I would sometimes feel the hairs on my neck stand up like someone was standing right there in that bare corner watching. One night, I stayed up late watching TV. The house was silent except for the faint buzzing of the screen. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, like a shadow peeling away from the wall. When I turned, there was nothing, just that same blank space. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. The shadows there were thicker, darker, as though the light refused to touch them. And then faintly I heard something. Breathing. Slow, raspy breathing. I froze, my chest tight, my ears straining. It was coming from the corner. "Mom?" I whispered. No answer. I stood, my legs trembling. The breathing stopped instantly, as though whatever it was didn't want me to notice. The silence pressed against me until I felt like screaming. I backed away, step by shaky step, until I reached the staircase. Just as I turned to climb, I heard it. A voice. Soft, low, broken, like someone whispering with a throat full of gravel. "Don't leave me." The TV flickered, the screen warping with static. The room's temperature dropped so sharply that my breath came out in white mist, and in that exact second, I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, wrong. Its body was pressed into the corner, bent in such a way that it looked like its spine was snapping backwards. Its head was tilted, its eyes nothing but pits of darkness, staring directly into me. I stumbled onto the stairs, my heartbeat rattling in my ears, but it didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, crouched in that empty corner like it had always belonged. That was the first night I realized my mother never left that space empty for decoration. She left it empty because something already lived there, and it had finally decided to let me see it. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the old house made me jump. But the sound I dreaded most was silence, because in the silence I could hear it again. That slow, raspy breathing from the living room corner. By dawn, I convinced myself it had been a hallucination, Maybe I dozed off and dreamed it. But when I walked past the living room, I stopped cold. The carpet near the corner was wet, not with water. No, it was darker, thicker. When I bent down to look, my stomach turned. It was blood. A small, perfect circle of dried blood, as though someone had stood there for hours, bleeding. I backed away, trembling. My mother came downstairs then, her face pale, her eyes red from a sleepless night. She saw me staring at the corner and whispered, "You saw him, didn't you?" I nodded slowly, her lips pressed tight. "Never answer him. Whatever he says, whatever he asks, you do not answer." That night, despite my fear, I couldn't resist looking again. Something about the corner pulled me, like invisible hands reaching from the shadows. I sat on the couch, clutching a blanket, my eyes locked on the darkness. The air grew heavier, thicker, until each breath felt like I was inhaling smoke. And then, he appeared. This time, not all at once. First, the legs, thin and impossibly long, bent at wrong angles. Then the torso, arching backward like it had been broken and never healed. His head came last, jerking upward from the shadow, eyes like bottomless pits. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My body felt pinned, locked by his stare. He leaned forward slightly, his neck snapping with each motion. The sound was like dry wood breaking. Then that voice, low, guttural, broken. "Help me. Please." I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. His mouth widened in a grotesque smile, teeth long and sharp like glass shards. "Say my name," he whispered. The room spun. I had never heard his name, but in that instant, it was as if something ancient, buried deep in my memory, clawed its way to the surface. A name formed on my tongue, pressing hard, begging to escape. I bit down hard, drawing blood from my lip to stop it. He tilted his head, watching. And then, his body snapped back, retreating into the wall, the corner swallowing him whole. The lights flickered back on. The air warmed. But I was left shaking, knowing what would happen if I ever let that name slip. From upstairs, I heard my mother scream. A scream so raw, so terrified, that my heart nearly stopped. I bolted up the stairs, stumbling into her bedroom. She wasn't there. The window was wide open, the curtains whipping in the cold night air. And carved deep into the wall above her bed, in jagged, bloody letters, was a single word. The name. The same one that had almost escaped my lips. I stood frozen at the doorway, staring at the letters carved into the wall. The blood was still dripping, thick and fresh, as though someone had just scratched them with broken fingers. The name pulsed in my head, hammering like a second heartbeat. The air in the room was freezing, my breath puffing in white clouds. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I turned, my throat tightening. It was my mother. Or at least, it looked like her. She stood at the end of the hall, her body stiff, her head tilted far too much to the side. Her eyes were glassy, her lips split into a jagged grin that wasn't hers. "Sweetheart," she rasped, but the voice was wrong, too deep, too hollow. "You almost said it. Why didn't you?" I staggered back, my legs weak, the name clawing harder and harder inside my mind. Every corner of the hallway seemed to ripple, shadows stretching toward me like hands. She, or it, took a step closer. Her bare feet dragged against the floor, leaving streaks of dark red behind. "Say it," she hissed, her voice now layered, like a dozen mouths speaking at once. "Say it, and I will stop." The pressure in my head became unbearable. It wasn't just in my thoughts anymore, it was in the walls and the floorboards, vibrating through the whole house. That cursed name demanded to be spoken. I clamped my hands over my mouth, tears streaming down my face. My vision blurred, and in the haze I saw them. Dozens of figures standing in every shadow, their bodies twisted, faces stretched in silent screams. All of them watching me, all of them waiting. The thing wearing my mother's skin leaned in close, her face inches from mine. Her breath was rancid, like rotting meat. "You will not resist forever," she whispered. "No one does." And then she was gone. Just gone. The hallway empty, the air heavy with silence. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, shaking. The next morning, the house looked normal. The writing on the wall was gone. My mother was in the kitchen, cooking breakfast like nothing had happened. She smiled at me, asked if I wanted eggs. But when she turned, I saw it. Her shadow. It didn't move with her. It stayed in the corner, stretching impossibly long, smiling that same jagged smile. And I knew. I wasn't living with my mother anymore. I was living with it. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of wet stone and decay. My headlamp cast a weak, trembling cone of light, illuminating the ancient rock walls. I was a botanist, and my job was to find new life, but I felt like I was searching for the end of it. The cave system was in the remote mountains of California, a place no one had explored in decades. I was alone, miles from civilization, my only company the rhythmic drip of water from the ceiling. And then I saw it. A soft, otherworldly glow emanated from a cluster of fungi on the cavern floor. It was a faint, blue light, pulsating gently. My heart quickened. Bioluminescence. A new species, perhaps. I carefully approached, my camera and sample kit at the ready. The cluster was beautiful, like a living constellation of stars on the damp earth. My rational mind told me to be excited, but a cold dread seeped into my bones. There was something else here, something I couldn't place. It was the silence. Not a lack of sound, but an active, oppressive quiet that seemed to absorb every noise I made, even the sound of my own breath. I knelt, reaching out to touch the fungi. It was cool and firm, like a cluster of tiny glass-like mushrooms. As my fingers made contact, I felt a jolt, not a shock, but a deep, resonant vibration. It wasn't a sound I could hear, but a sound I could feel, a low, pulsing hum that resonated through my bones. My head swam, and for a moment the world tilted. The cave, the rocks, the light, everything seemed to hold still for a single, unnerving second. I shook it off and took a small sample, carefully placing it in a sterile jar. I had what I came for. As I packed up my equipment, the blue glow of the fungi seemed to brighten, pulsating with a faster, more urgent rhythm. The silent hum I felt in my bones grew stronger, and I could feel it radiating out from the fungal cluster, a silent wave filling the cavern. Back at my lab in Los Angeles, the sample jar sat in the center of a sterile, brightly lit room. I was excited, buzzing with the thrill of discovery. I put on my headphones and began my work, isolating the samples, running tests. I recorded the fungi with a highly sensitive microphone, hoping to capture some of the infrasound I had felt. When I ran the analysis, the computer screen showed a flat, silent line. But my bones hummed. I wasn't just hearing it. I was a part of it. I glanced at the screen, and I saw it. In the corner of the lab, a shadow on the wall. A perfect black shape that didn't belong. It was a shadow that didn't move. A shadow without a source. My blood ran cold. The humming in my bones intensified, and I looked down at my hand. My reflection in the lab counter was faint, but I could see it. My shadow on the counter was not mine. It was a perfect flat black silhouette of a cluster of fungi. The hum in my bones was constant now, a low thrum that vibrated through my teeth. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with silent, pulsing blue light. The shadow in the lab had grown bolder, darker. It clung to the wall, a perfect fungal silhouette, and it seemed to lengthen and shrink with the silent pulsations emanating from the sample jar. Days blurred into nights as I obsessively studied the fungus. It wasn't behaving like any organism I knew. It didn't consume nutrients, it didn't produce waste, it didn't reproduce in the traditional sense, it simply vibrated. And that vibration, that silent song, was changing things. One morning, I came into the lab and found a dead fly on the floor beneath the sample jar. There were no visible injuries, but its wings were stiff, and its body was unnaturally cold. As I bent down to examine it, I noticed something else. Its shadow on the white tile floor was the same perfect fungal silhouette that clung to the wall. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my scientific curiosity. This wasn't just a new species, it was something else entirely. Something that could change things, change life itself. I started to notice other changes in the lab. Small objects would vibrate silently on the counters. Water in beakers would ripple without any external force. And the shadows were multiplying. Every object in the lab now cast a faint secondary shadow, a perfect unmoving silhouette of the pulsating blue fungi. Then it started happening to the other scientists in the building. Dr. Ramirez, from the microbiology department, walked past me in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. I noticed his shadow stretching out behind him on the linoleum floor. It wasn't his shadow. Panic set in. I tried to warn them, to explain what was happening, but my words sounded hollow, insane. They looked at me with pity and concern. They couldn't see the shadows. They couldn't feel the hum. Was I the only one? That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I slept in the lab, the silent pulsations of the fungus a constant lullaby. I woke up to find the shadow on the wall had moved. It was no longer on the wall. It was on the ceiling, directly above me, and it was dripping. Not liquid, but silence. A heavy, suffocating stillness that made my ears ring. I looked down at my own body. My shadow on the floor was flickering, dissolving at the edges. And where my shadow should have been, another one was forming. A perfect, still, silent silhouette of the blue, pulsating fungi. The breath caught in my throat. The silent song wasn't just changing things around me. It was changing me. I stared at the shadow, a perfect silhouette of the fungi forming beneath my feet. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my body felt calm, unnervingly still. The hum in my bones was not a vibration anymore. It was a song, a melody of silent light that was consuming me from the inside out. My skin felt cool, like glass. I could feel the microscopic fungi growing, their tendrils weaving through my bloodstream, their silent hum rewriting my biology. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, disorienting sense of peace. My rational mind was screaming, fighting, but my body was no longer listening. It was accepting. It was becoming one with the silent light. I looked at my hands, and I could see a faint blue glow beneath the skin, a soft pulsating light that mirrored the fungi in the jar. I wasn't a human anymore. I was a host. I stumbled out of the lab and into the hallway. My body felt weightless, my movements fluid and unnatural. I passed a mirror and I saw my reflection. My eyes were a deep pulsing blue, and my skin had a translucent quality to it. My shadow on the floor was a perfect, silent, fungal silhouette. I saw a man from accounting walking towards me, his face drawn in concern. He said something, but I couldn't hear him. The silence was absolute now. The world around me was a moving picture without sound. The traffic on the street below, the sirens of an ambulance, the hurried footsteps of people on the sidewalk, all of it was a terrifying, silent film. The man from accounting reached out, his lips moving, his hand on my shoulder. He was trying to get my attention, but the humming in my bones was the only sound in the world. I felt the air around him ripple, and then his shadow on the floor flickered and changed. It was no longer his. It was mine. It was the fungi's. I watched, my mind screaming in silent terror, as his body, his very being, went still. His eyes, once full of concern, now held a deep, serene peace. His skin took on the same pale glow as mine, and he became a part of the silent, pulsing network. He didn't die. He was simply integrated. I looked down at my hands. They were glowing now, a vibrant blue that filled my vision. I felt a single thought, a final horrifying realization from the collective mind of the fungi. We were not a disease. We were an upgrade. We were perfection. The noise, the anger, the chaos of human life. It was a sickness. And the silent hum, the beautiful pulsating light, was the cure. It was a new kind of existence, a singular consciousness of perfect silent harmony. I was no longer Elena. I was a single note in an endless, silent symphony. My body, my memories, my fears, all of it was dissolving, becoming a part of the greater whole. My final conscious thought was of a single beautiful image. The city of Los Angeles, a sprawling, chaotic metropolis, now a silent, glowing graveyard of pulsating blue light. And I was at the center of it all, a living seed of the silent apocalypse, my final silent breath turning the world into a beautiful, perfect nightmare.